Hi everyone, this is my run on the Love the Melody of Courage event, which is Edward's debut event, and this fight is specifically going to be the TCC Challenge Xtreme, posted by the Crystal Chronicles podcast group. I'll be covering what the TCC Challenge Xtreme criteria is, as well as an overview of the fight, my party composition, and finally I will head off into the actual battle itself. For those interested in only specific sections of the video, there is also a timestamp in the video description that you can use to jump to the area that you are interested in. So firstly, on the TCC Challenge Xtreme, as always, no synergy characters are allowed. So all the featured characters are banned, including Ardyn. There are also a few key characters who would make this fight too easy, and they are likewise banned. And in order of the appearance on this banner here, Eldnach, Mediterranean, Nine, Bash, Afmal, Dash, Gabrant, Trey, and Noctis are all banned characters. In addition to that, you cannot use burst mode. You can equip a burst weapon, but specifically entering burst mode is not allowed. No threat unit can be set, and your summon has to be either Chocobo or Spirit Moogle. And definitely Chocobo is the better summon because Spirit Moogle only gives you one turn of summon and doesn't actually have any special effect. The special notable criteria in this extreme challenge is that you cannot inflict more than 2 debuffs on one enemy at the same time. So the most number of debuffs you can inflict is 2 at any one given time, which hinders a party composition significantly because you need to be able to pick party members who do not inflict too many debuffs, or you avoid the criteria of this challenge. Now, in addition to this, TCC Challenge Xtreme and the usual TCC Challenge always requires you to meet all mission objectives. So you not only have to finish the fight, but you need to meet all mission objectives laid out by the chaos fight itself, while following all these restrictions. Okay, now that we've gone through the requirements of the Extreme TCC Challenge fight, I'll just be going through the quick overview of the fight and the reasons behind the party members that I chose, which is Balthier, War of Light, and Ramza. This chaos fight consists of 2 waves. The first wave is pretty easy, it's just a standard Ochu enemy with 2 micro chews. The Ochu will always resummon the micro chews every now and then, and the micro chews only has about 100,000 or so HP, so they die very quickly from splash damage. You do need to be able to have a way to break all the enemies at the same time, because the micro chews have a tendency to do HP attack damage even when they only have about 6,000 brave or so. And although it doesn't hurt that much, over time it really starts to add up. But otherwise, your main damage focus should be on the Ochu enemy. Now, the second wave is where the challenge really comes in, especially if you think about the restrictions placed by the Extreme TCC criteria. Now, first of all, if you look at the boss's attacks, the boss only has 2 attacks that does HP damage in his whole arsenal of attacks. So firstly, it's just a standard melee HP attack in the form of Rip. So that is just a standard. If the boss gets too much brave, the boss will let loose a single target HP attack, and for this boss it's called Rip. The other HP attack is Storm Breath, which will reduce all your brave to half of what it is. But as far as I can tell, the amount reduced doesn't get added to the boss's brave. However, Storm Breath does include a self battery to the boss, and afterwards it will unleash a group magic, brave, and HP attack. So you can imagine if these attacks happen to break one or more of your party members, it will deal significant HP damage. The rest of the attacks are just brave attacks, but what makes this fight really challenging, especially in the later parts of the fight where the boss's stats are boosted through the usual chaos mechanics, there are two things. Firstly is that the boss has an attack called Avatar Needle and Avatar Needle Plus, and you can see the boss using it. The attack itself is only a brave attack, but the attack actually grants two very big buffs to the boss. One is HP damage up, so this is similar to the HP damage up that Charlotta gives to the party, and the other is Brave Regen to self. And the HP damage up is very potent. I believe it's somewhere around the lines of 50%, and then once it's below, once it uses the Avatar Needle Plus, it uses this when it's below 50% health. The HP damage up is an increase of HP damage by about 70%, which is very big. And if you think about it, it also gives itself Brave Regen, and as you can see here, it guarantees that the boss will do 2 turns in a row on its next turn. So the danger here is that once it uses Avatar Needle, on its next turn it gets a Brave Regen, so it gets some amount of Brave. It lets loose a standard Brave attack and gets even more Brave, and then it gets a consecutive turn and unleash an HP attack, which can probably kill you if it gets too much Brave. Other than that, the second mechanic in this fight that makes it really challenging is that the bosses have very high max Brave, especially in the later parts of the fight when their stats are boosted, and they have many attacks that battery themselves. So for example, I already mentioned Storm Breath, which refunds Brave to the boss based on the HP damage dealt. It has also Rising Slash and Rising Slash Plus, which although it's just a Brave attack, each time it hits you, the boss will battery itself regardless of how much Brave damage that you take. And it also of course has the Brave Regen that it grants itself through the Avatar Needle. And I believe there is also another attack, I think, Feather Shots Plus. So when it's below 50% health, the Feather Shot becomes the plus version, which will battery the other boss. So many attacks here battery themselves, and if you don't have very strong Brave shaving characters, it will get to a point where the amount of Brave battery that they grant themselves become too much for you and start to overwhelm you, and you'll get to a point where they can then just unleash 20k HP attacks on you because you are not able to shave their Brave in time. So when you put together a party to fight this boss in the Extreme Challenge, you do have to think about these mechanics in mind. And what makes the Extreme Challenge very difficult is that you can only inflict 2 debuffs on the enemies, and that restriction alone severely limits the characters that you can use, not even counting in the banned characters in the Extreme Challenge that I've gone through. So weighing all that in consideration, the party that I chose is Balthier, Warrior of Light, and Ramza, and I'll go through a few reasons why. So first of all, Balthier may seem like a strange reason here, but the main idea here is that because you can't displace their buffs, because you can only inflict 2 debuffs, I use Balthier because he can actually steal the HP damage up and Brave Regen that the bosses can grant. And that is huge. Imagine Balthier with a 50% HP damage up aura on himself. Now normally the HP damage up and Brave Regen is only a 1 turn buff, but any buff that Balthier steals gets extended by another turn, so he actually gets 2 turns of HP damage up. On top of that, Balthier's damage is actually still quite significant at this point of the game. his EX will usually deal 99,999 damage to both bosses at the same time. And at the later parts of the fight, when the boss starts to amass a lot of Brave, you can use Balthier's AA. Balthier's AA will actually steal the boss's Brave on himself and leave the boss with very little Brave. It makes them very easy to break. For the other character, I use Warrior of Light, and the main reason here is for the shields, and this will help to protect against the 2 consecutive turns that the bosses have after using Avatar Needle. Like I said, the danger here is that when they use Avatar Needle, usually the first turn will result in a big Brave attack, and then they will quickly or immediately follow this up with an HP attack. If your characters are all having the Brave Shield from Warrior of Light, the first Brave attack that the boss will do will deal no damage because it's absorbed by the shield, and therefore on its second turn the boss will have very little Brave, if any, to deal any HP attack. So Warrior of Light helps to protect against the Avatar Needle mechanic that the boss has. For the third party member, I chose Ramza. And there are a few reasons for this. Firstly, the fight has a 100 turn requirement here, and I chose Ramza because of his turn efficiency. His HP +++ attack takes no turns. On top of that, his EX is actually very powerful. It does usually about 90,000 damage to both bosses, and it batteries the entire party at the same time, himself included. And actually this helps Balthier because for Balthier to recharge his EX, he needs to use 1 skill and 1 HP plus attack, and Balthier's HP plus attack is terrible. However, if he's battered by Ramza or Warrior of Light, his HP plus attack still does considerable damage, so you can easily get to his EX without wasting too many skill users, which are quite crucial. Very nicely also, Ramza can only inflict 1 debuff in the form of his EX, and Warrior of Light inflicts the second debuff in the lock debuff that he inflicts. Balthier himself doesn't inflict any debuffs, so this party can at most only inflict 2 debuffs at any one time, which will fulfill the criteria of the Extreme TCC challenge, so you don't have to worry about the debuffs. Other than that, the debuff that Ramza inflicts really helps to keep the Brave damage from the bosses quite manageable, and therefore Warrior of Light can absorb the Brave damage with his shield, particularly in the later parts of the fight when you also use Warrior of Light's AA to further reduce Brave damage taken. One thing to note is that for Balthier, I did remove his passive here, the Fleet-Footed. The reason for this is not to save CP, but because the Fleet-Footed actually allows him to have a small chance to inflict speed down on the boss, which is what you really don't want in this fight, because then there's a risk that the bosses may get 3 debuffs. So I removed that passive from Balthier. That's it. With that said, let's move on to the fight. I'll see you there. Alright, so starting on the first wave, it is pretty easy. You just really focus all your damage on the Ochu in the middle. If you need to break the micro choose, you can use Balthier's Snatch Shot, which does AoE Brave Shaving. The weak thing about this whole party setup is that the Brave Shaving capabilities are somewhat low, which is actually quite problematic on the later parts on the second wave, but I'll touch more on that later on. If you are using Ramza, you want to quickly get to 3 stacks of his shout so that you can get access to his HP+++. So I start off the fight immediately by using shout twice with Ramza to build full 3 stacks. Lastly, for Warrior of Light, you want to be a bit more conservative on his skill uses on the first wave, because the second wave is very taxing on his shields, especially also on the first wave, right? His shields can actually absorb most of the hits here, and you don't need to use any of his skills to deal damage if his shields are up. His HP plus attack itself does quite significant damage, but you do need everyone to be shielded to get access to his HP plus attack. Unfortunately, I did suffer some HP damage already in the first wave, which brings me to the second weak point of this party setup. If you look at the party, the only party member that can heal HP is Warrior of Light, and that is only tied to his EX. So with this party, you also need to be very careful on how you take HP damage, because healing is very limited. And overall for wave 1 for Balthier, uh, what I aimed for was to use more of his snatch shot than great aim, because I plan to use great aim not only for brave shaving on the second wave, but also of course to steal the buffs the boss gets when they use Avatar Needle. Having said that, you do need to save at least a few skill uses of his snatch shot, because snatch shot is the only AoE brave shaving capability this party has. So there are times on the second wave where both bosses gets or batteries themselves for a lot of brave, and in those circumstances you really need to use Balthier snatch shot to keep their brave levels low. Okay, so we got by the first wave without too much trouble, some HP damage taken, but we will be able to heal back up to full with Warrior of Light, because the starting part of wave 2 is actually quite easy, and the bosses don't tend to use Avatar Needle immediately. So on the second wave, right, my goal is to try to focus DPS on one of the bosses until it reaches 50% health. And then after that, I switch to the second boss. Every now and then, of course, I will need to switch targets if I need to brave shave the other boss, but otherwise I try to focus my damage more on one of the bosses. Okay, so here you can see the boss using Storm Breath, which deals some amount of damage. It's not too bad as long as you ensure your party members are shielded, because the shield will absorb the brave hit portion. But Storm Breath will always battery the boss before it uses it, so no matter what, you will be taking some HP damage. But as long as you can heal after that, it shouldn't be too bad. The dangerous thing about this fight also is that the boss has many different types of AoE attacks, so you can actually never tell when the boss will actually use Storm Breath. There doesn't seem to be anything that predicts when it will use that attack versus other group attacks. And the only way to get around that is to be a bit careful, and if you see the boss targeting all, just make sure that every party member is shielded, just in case that the attack is a Storm Breath attack. Okay, so this is the first time that you see the boss using Avatar Needle in this fight, and the game helps you to indicate whether the Avatar Needle buff is active, because you can see this bluish green aura surrounding the boss. That signifies that on that boss's next turn, it will have 2 consecutive turns. So to get around this, similar to Storm Breath, you really need to make sure that every party member is shielded. And very importantly, you will get a turn with Balthier before the boss gets his next turn, and in that turn you either need to use his Great Aim to steal both the boss's buff, or at least Snapshot or Balthier's EX to steal one buff. If you steal one buff, the buff you steal is always going to be the important one, which is HP damage up. You really don't want the boss to have that, because even a 10k HP damage can result in death of your party member if you leave it on. Notably also, once Balthier steals that buff, he does insane damage. So here I get hit by Storm Breath again, but because everyone is shielded and no one gets broken, the Storm Breath attack only does about 2400 damage per party member. So Warrior of Light's EX can heal this up, no problem. And here you see the Balthier's EX doing very nice AoE damage. Okay, second Avatar Needle, and unfortunately here Balthier doesn't get a turn in before the boss's turn. So this is a bit risky because Balthier isn't able to steal the buffs. Now the boss does Reap at 6500 Brave, and with the HP damage up buff, it should deal close to 10,000 damage. So Warrior of Light would have been able to survive the attack, but it would have left him quite low. Luckily though, he actually managed to dodge the attack, so clutch dodge coming in. So at this point, Balthier only has 2 snapshot left. I use Great Aim here to shave boss A because boss B has very little Brave. And at this point, I think it's better to save snapshot for the later parts of the fight. This is why Ramza's Innovate is quite useful. Balthier is 1 HP plus attack away from his EX, and because he's at full Brave, you can nicely use HP plus to deal some nice damage while reaching full EX meter, and therefore you can conserve his skills that way. Okay, so you can see the game telling you wins further gathering strength for boss A. That is the game telling you that boss A has reached 50% health and its stats are further increased. So at this point, this is where I switch targets to boss B. Boss A will continue to take damage from splash damage, and every now and then, of course, I will need to switch target to boss A to Brave Shave or steal boss A's buff if it uses Avatar Needle. But very nicely, over time, the HP damage will start to equalize, and therefore you can still finish off the bosses very close to each other. Storm Breath, but again everyone is shielded, so it does only about 2800 damage. Easily tankable, and you can heal after that. And here you can see one of the dangerous mechanics of the fight where the boss can battery each other. You can see now boss B has 26,000 Brave, and as much as possible, you can try to time Balthier and Ramza's EX and use them as Brave Shavers, but that's of course very challenging, and that's where Balthier's AA really comes in handy, of course, as well as the summon, where you should treat as an emergency button if you happen to not have enough turns to Brave Shave. Okay, so boss A used Avatar Needle, and this is quite dangerous because all the stats are boosted at the below 50% threshold. Luckily, Balthier did get a turn, so he used Great Aim, and interestingly enough, the moment you use Great Aim, the buffs will be stolen first before damage is calculated. So Great Aim itself on that turn gets the boost from HP damage up. Okay, so here comes the 2 consecutive attacks. Because I'm shielded, the first attack does nothing and the boss didn't get any Brave. And therefore the second attack, the boss will always do a Brave attack after that because it doesn't have any Brave that can lead into an HP attack. Okay, so boss B has also reached 50% threshold. Now at this stage of the fight, it gets significantly more challenging. The bosses will start to deal more damage, and Warrior of Light Shield will start to really take a toll. At this point, you want to consider using some of the AA skills that you have, in particularly Ramza's attack up to deal significant damage, and Warrior of Lights protect all to reduce the brave damage taken. The goal here is really only to try to stave off having to use summon for as long as possible. So just try to keep breaking the boss as much as possible with whatever skills that you have left, and try to save the summon really only to a point where you don't have a choice but to use it. So this is quite dangerous because both bosses have more than 20k brave, hence why I said earlier it's important to try to save a few of Balthier's snatch shot abilities. So far I managed to save my summon because Ramza's EX and Balthier's EX came just in time to Brave Shave, so I could still get another few rounds of damage in before having to pop my summon. I use Balthier's AA here because the boss is targeting all, and I don't know whether that could be a Storm Breath attack or not, and obviously Storm Breath starting from 26k Brave will deal a lot of damage to the party. So I decided to use one of Balthier's AA there to shave boss A and save my summon for a bit longer. Here I decided to take a risk. I could have used Warrior of Light's Throw Buckler to shave off a bit more Brave, but I was greedy and I wanted to save it, so I just used HP++ attack. I didn't expect the boss to use Rip though. And unfortunately this left Warrior of Light at just 5k health remaining, which is quite dangerous at this point of the game. Okay, so the boss has used Avatar Needle. And at this point you want to check to make sure shields are still up in time to absorb the hit. Really, you don't want to risk it. So I just use his shield again to refresh everyone's shield. And of course with Balthier, I use Great Aim to dispel the buffs on boss A. So here's where I use Balthier's last remaining AA to shave off boss A. Again, because I'm fearing that the attack could be a Storm Breath attack. Even after that though, I made the decision to pop my summon, and the main reason for this is both bosses are targeting all, and Warrior of Light only has 5000 HP left. And I was too worried that both the bosses may use Storm Breath. I don't know whether that's actually possible in the AI script, but two Storm Breaths together back to back will likely kill off Warrior of Light. And at this point of the game, I don't want to risk that, so I decided to use a summon. On hindsight though, if I wanted to summon, I should have saved Balthier's last AA, because that could have come in handy a bit later on. And at this point of the game, you want to make sure that you try to kill off the bosses as close as possible to each other, because when one boss dies, the remaining will enrage, and once it enrages, it becomes very difficult to manage. So you want to kill both bosses off at as close as possible. See that it starts to get really dangerous. I'm running out of Brave shaving options here. I was thinking of using Brave Attack plus plus in Ramza because it's a better Brave Shave than HP Attack. But here I decided to risk it and just use HP Attack. It still shaves a little, so I wasn't too worried about the boss using Rip. Warrior of Light could have survived the attack, but luckily it didn't and just used Rising Slash. So this is Balthier's last Great Aim, and I decided to use it to steal the buff because I think the buff is more dangerous. But the danger here is boss B has 26k Brave, so at this point I can't shave Brave any longer. So I'm just crossing fingers hoping that the attack isn't a Storm Breath attack, and it wasn't. It does however battery boss A, and that can be quite dangerous, but luckily I've stolen its buff. So even if it does an HP attack, I could have survived it. So at this point, the boss is low enough, and I managed to finish them off before their Brave gets out of control here. And that's it. As always, if you enjoyed the video, do leave a like, subscribe, or leave a comment. Until then, I'll see you in the next chaos fight. Bye bye.